So some functionality we added in the second phase of development was the ability to be able to map at the port level. So previously you could only map between countries, and you did that by using the 2-digit ISO country code. So for example, for the United Kingdom, that code is GB. But sometimes we have better data than that. We know more specifically where wildlife went through. Did it go through a seaport or an airport? So we wanted to give the user the ability to map that data if it existed. So the way that works is you need to have the port code of the port that you're interested in, that you know that was involved in the trade. So for airports, we use the 4-digit ICAO code, and for seaports, we use the 5-digit UN LOCODE code. So the reason why we use codes instead of the name of the airport or the seaport is the same reason we use codes for the country rather than writing out the full name of the country. And that's because there are multiple names for the same port or airport, prone to different spellings. There could be spelling mistakes or grammatical differences or errors. So by using these standardized codes, it just makes for an easier system, because wherever you are in the world, there's this one system of codes that we're using. If you want some help on where to find these codes for the ports you're working with, go to trademapper.co.uk, and I've included the links there so you can follow them. So quite a nice thing about how we've developed TradeMapper in this way is you can actually mix a trade route, where for some parts you only know the country that was involved, but for other parts you know the specific port. And TradeMapper allows you to still have that one trade route, but where you know it's a more specific port, you can include that. Where you only know the country, you have it like that. So for example, you might have a trade route where you know that the wildlife came from South Africa, it transited through Vietnam, but you know very specifically it was seized at Beijing Airport, and you can map that trade route. So I'm going to show you how to do that with just some example dummy data. So this isn't real data, but it kind of mimics the structure you would want. Gives you a demonstration of what it would look like. So you can see here in Excel, this is just very basic data that you would want. You've got your species. I'm imagining this was illegal wildlife seizure data, but it could be legal trade data. It could be not even wildlife related. It could be people moving from one place to another. But anyway, we've got our name of our species, we've got the quantity, and that's how TradeMapper will determine how thick to draw the arrows. And then in the rest of the columns, we've got information on either the country or the ports that are involved. So the way I've set it out is quite a simple trade route. We have exporter, transit, and importer, but you could make it as long and complicated as you wanted to. And here I've mixed different levels of data. So for some parts of different trade routes, we only know the country. For other parts, we know the airport or the seaport, and I've mixed airports and seaports in one column. So for example, here in column C and D, this is where we have our information on exporter. The way I've laid it out is in the first column, I have the name of the port. If we don't know the specifics of the port and we only know the country, I've instead included the country, the 2-letter ISO country code. So for rows 2, 3, and 5, I know the exact port or airport or seaport, but for rows 4, I only know that it involved Mozambique. So when this goes into TradeMapper, anything which is not the 2-letter ISO code is going to ignore. So it's only going to recognize in this code, there's one country, and that's Mozambique. And that doesn't matter that it's ignoring rows 2, 3, and 5, because in the next column, that's where we've put the codes. So this in row 2, this is the airport. Okay, that's the seaport, because it's got 5 digits. Same for row 3, but for row 5, because it's only got 4 digits, we know that that's an airport code. So this top line of line data, that goes from this port, which is in UAE, I believe. So it goes from a seaport to another seaport in Mexico to another seaport, of which I can no longer remember where it is. I picked them at random, which is why we'll see some crazy trade routes. But anyway, because each one of them has 5 digits, we know that row 2 is purely trade between seaports. It's a bit different for row 3. We've got trade from a seaport, because it's 5 digits, we can tell that. Then it's going to an airport. We can tell that it's 4 digits. And then finally, it's going to a country because we know that's got two digits. So that's CN, which is China. For row 3, it's going from country. So it's only got 2 digits. Through then a seaport, because it's got 5 digits, before finally back to country level data, 2 letters for Vietnam. And then finally, this one I'm showing you, this is an example of why it's so nice to have the ability to map between airports or seaports. All of these are actually in the same country, so they're all in Tanzania, but it's going between the airports of Arusha, then going through Dar es Salaam airport, and then Dodoma airport. So you'll see that on TradeMapper that it's just internal trade. So now I've got my data set up. It looks like that. We'll save it as a CSV file because that's all that TradeMapper can understand. I've already saved that, so I'm just going to save it again. Then go to TradeMapper and you'll see just a blank map ahead of you. Select data, navigate to wherever you've saved your data. This should be mine. And there's instructions on trademapper.co.uk about setting up this importer panel. So I won't go through it in too much detail. All I'll say is that my species is correctly identified as text, my quantity is correctly identified as being quantity field. And then here's where we get to the country level data. So the only thing you need to remember is if you have 2 columns of data for the same part of the trade route, which we do have in this case, we've got 2 columns containing importer information, 2 columns containing exporter information, and 2 columns containing transit information. All you need to remember is for those pairs of data, you need to give them the same number so that TradeMapper knows to look in both of them when deciding on what order to draw the arrows in. So this first column here is the exporter. So we're going to change the little orange circle to 1 and 1 in its matching column. And then we'll just check that it's understood, that TradeMapper has understood what data in each column. So here, as you'll recall, this is our column where the only trade we have is with Mozambique at the country level. So I'm going to leave that as a country code. It's correctly identified that this is the exporter, so we'll leave it at that. Then we go to the next column and it's correctly identified that this is port code and that it's an exporter. So that's fine, all I have to do is change the order. We'll move along to the transit, exactly the same, but we're going to tell TradeMapper that this is point 2 in the trade route. And check again, that's country code and that's port code, that's fine. And then for importer, the 2 final columns, we're just going to change them to 3. And by having both columns have the exact same number, it doesn't matter then if your data is at a 2-digit country code or if you've got the more specific ports. TradeMapper will know to look in both of those columns. So when you're happy that that's all set up, you can click done and it will have drawn it and give us some crazy trade routes. So I mentioned the Tanzania, the internal Tanzania trade. You can see here that it's going between these 3 ports and these 3 airports. If we ever forget the name of them, you can hover over and get the little box, hover over, and it'll tell you which port. And that's pulling from an underlying data set built into TradeMapper. So even if you didn't have that information in your Excel file, it would know the name of the airport because there's an underlying file within TradeMapper. We've got the one here, which goes all the way from, Port Rashid in UAE, all the way over to Mexico, and then I believe the Cayman Islands, that was the trade route. Then we've got this other one going from starting at Mozambique. That was, if we hover over it, we can remember. So that's going specifically from a port, a seaport in Mozambique, through an airport in France, before just going to the middle of China. So we didn't know what else, and we didn't have any more specific data. So that's how you mix and match your port and country codes.